The night was unnaturally still, the kind of silence that presses against the eardrums like a physical weight. Shiryu adjusted the strap of his shield, his breath misting in the cold air as he and Seiya trudged through the dense undergrowth of the abandoned ruins just outside San Francisco. The mission had come directly from Mitsumasa Kido, an urgent cryptic request to investigate an ancient burial site rumored to hold the remains of a lost knight. Local legends spoke of a warrior who had vanished centuries ago, his armor never recovered, his fate sealed in whispers of madness and blood. Seiya kicked a loose stone, his usual bravado dulled by the oppressive atmosphere. "You feel that?" he muttered, rubbing his arms. "Like we're being watched." Shiryu didn't answer. His senses, honed by years of training, screamed at him to turn back. The ruins were too quiet. No insects, no wind, just a crunch of their boots on dead leaves. The moonlight, pale and sickly, filtered through the skeletal branches above, casting jagged shadows that seemed to twitch when he wasn't looking. Then they found it. A stone archway, half buried in the earth, its edges carved with constellations Shiryu recognized. Aries, twisted and distorted, its horns elongated into something predatory. The ground sloped downward into darkness, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic. Blood. Shiryu ignited a flare, the sudden crimson light painting the walls in gory strokes. The tunnel led to a circular chamber, its ceiling lost in shadow. At its center stood a sarcophagus, its surface etched with the same runes as the archway, but these were darker, stained as if dipped in ink. No, not ink. Shiryu's stomach turned. It was blood, old and flaking, but unmistakable. "Look at this," Seiya said, brushing his fingers over the Aries symbol at the head of the tomb. The moment he touched it, the flare sputtered, its light dimming to a dying ember. A gust of frozen wind howled through the chamber, though there were no openings, no exits but the way they come. Then the whispering started. At first it was just a murmur, words slipping between the cracks of reality, too faint to grasp. But it grew louder, closer, until Shiryu could feel the breath of it against his neck, a voice that wasn't human, that couldn't be, syllables grinding together like broken bones. "Who wakes the slumbering ram shall never see the dawn again." Seiya staggered back, his face ashen. "Did you hear?" The sarcophagus lid shifted, just a fraction, just enough for a black, viscous liquid to seep out, pooling on the floor like spilled oil. But it moved, it crawled, tendrils snaking toward them faster than thought. Shiryu's dragon shield flared to life, its green glow barely holding back the advancing darkness. "Run!" he roared, shoving Seiya toward the tunnel. They sprinted, the whispers now a chorus, the walls themselves pulsating as if breathing. Behind them, the sarcophagus burst open with a sound like tearing flesh. Shiryu didn't look back. He didn't need to. The thing that followed them, the thing that had been wearing the Aries cloth, was not a knight. Not anymore. Its footsteps were wrong, too heavy, too many. They barely made it out alive. The moment sunlight touched their skin, the entrance collapsed behind them, sealing whatever lurked below. But as they stood there, gasping, Shiryu noticed something that made his blood freeze. Seiya's fingers, the ones that had touched the tomb, were blackened, the skin peeling away to reveal something glistening and dark beneath. And when Seiya looked at him, just for a second, his eyes reflected not the sky, but a void filled with stars that had no right to exist. The curse had already taken root, and it was hungry. The nightmares began the night they returned from the tomb. Ikki had known darkness before, had drowned in it, choked on it, let it burn him alive and reshape him in the fires of his own rage. But this was different. This darkness watched. He woke screaming, his sheets drenched in sweat, his fingers clawing at his chest where the phoenix cloth usually rested. But the armor wasn't there. Instead, his skin was slick with something thick and dark, a substance that clung to his fingers like tar. He stumbled to the bathroom, his reflection in the mirror making him freeze. His eyes were wrong. The irises had bled into the whites, leaving only pinpricks of black floating in pools of red, and behind him, just for a fraction of a second, he saw her, Shaina. Not the proud, fierce warrior he knew, but a broken thing. Her mask split down the middle, her lips shone shut with coarse black thread. She was kneeling on an altar under a sky that writhed with constellations he didn't recognize, stars that pulsed like veins, arranged in shapes that hurt to look at. Her silver armor was being peeled away, not by hands, but by shadows that moved with purpose, sliding between the plates like liquid. Then the vision was gone. Icky slammed his fist into the mirror, shattering it. Blood dripped from his knuckles, but the fragments on the floor still showed glimpses of the nightmare. Shaina's unblinking eyes, the altar, and the things standing over her that had too many limbs and not enough faces. Across the world, Hyoga stood knee-deep in Siberian snow, staring at the sky. The aurora borealis had always been a comfort to him, a reminder of his mother, of the beauty that still existed in the frozen wastes. But tonight, the lights weren't green or blue. They were red. Not the soft crimson of a sunset, but the deep, visceral red of an open wound, staining the entire horizon. The snow beneath his feet began to melt, not from warmth, but from something else, a corruption seeping up from the earth itself, turning the pristine white into a blackened sludge that reeked of rotting meat. And then he heard it, a voice whispering from the ice. "You were born from the cold, but you will burn with the rest." Hyoga's breath caught in his throat. The voice wasn't coming from around him. It was coming from inside his diamond dust. Back at the sanctuary, Mu paced the length of his chamber, his golden mask discarded on the floor. His temples throbbed, a pressure building behind his eyes like a parasite trying to chew its way out. The Aries cloth, usually serene in its alcove, was vibrating, not trembling, shaking, as if something inside it was fighting to get free. The ram's horns had grown longer, sharper, the metal warping into something closer to claws than armor. And the eyes were open. They shouldn't have been. Cloths didn't have eyes, but these did, glistening, wet orbs embedded in the metal, pupils slit like a goat's, tracking Mu's every move. "You hear it too, don't you?" Mu spun, his psychokinesis flaring, but the room was empty. The voice had been inside his head, and it hadn't been his own. It had been Lucius's. By dawn, the signs were everywhere. Doku found the Libra scales tipped violently to one side, the bowls overflowing with a substance that looked like congealed blood. Aphrodite's roses in the house of Pisces had withered overnight, their petals replaced with jagged, scale-like growths that hissed when touched. And in the depths of the sanctuary's archives, an ancient scroll, one that had been blank for centuries, now bore a single phrase, scrolled in handwriting that matched Mu's exactly. "The ram hungers."
The dormitory was too quiet. Shun knew something was wrong the moment he stepped inside. The air was thick, stagnant, like the room had been sealed for years instead of hours. His chains, Andromeda's sacred bonds, twitched at his wrists, sensing danger before he did. It started with the mirror. He hadn't noticed it at first. It stood propped against the far wall, an ornate antique. It didn't belong in the Spartan quarters of the sanctuary. The frame was carved with twisting serpents, their mouths open in silent screams, their eyes tiny rubies that glinted in the candlelight. Something about it pulled at him, a whisper at the edge of his hearing. "Come closer." Shun's fingers trembled as he reached out. The glass was cold, too cold, the kind of chill that seeped into bone and stayed there. His reflection stared back, But the eyes were wrong. His reflection's pupils were blown wide, swallowing the green of his irises, leaving only black voids. And it was smiling. Not his usual gentle smile, but a grotesque stretch of lips, too wide, too many teeth. "You were always the weakest," his reflection murmured, its voice a wet, guttural thing. "The first to break, the first to bleed." Shun tried to step back, but his body wouldn't obey. The chains at his wrists grew heavy, then moved on their own, slithering up his arms like living things. The metal burned where it touched, branding his skin with marks that hissed and bubbled. "Look at you, still clinging to kindness like it will save you." It raised a hand, Shun's hand, and pressed it against the glass. The surface rippled like water. Then the reflection pushed. Shun gasped as his own chains yanked him forward, slamming him against the mirror. His forehead struck the glass, but there was no pain, only the terrible, sinking sensation of falling through. The world tilted, colors bleeding together, the dormitory stretching into impossible angles. He was inside the mirror, and his reflection was outside. "Let's see how long you last in here," Not Shun whispered through the glass, its fingers tracing the surface lovingly. Behind it, the shadows in the room twitched, peeling away from the walls to form shapes. Tall, emaciated things with too many joints, their faces smooth and blank, save for gaping, lipless mouths. Shun screamed and slammed his fists against the mirror, but the mirror showed only the empty dormitory now. His chains coiled around his throat, tightening with every panicked breath. Somewhere in the darkness of the mirror world, something laughed. Icky found him an hour later. Shun was curled on the floor, his chains wrapped so tightly around his neck they'd bitten deep into his flesh, leaving angry purple bruises. The mirror lay shattered beside him, but the shards were clean. No blood, no fingerprints, as if nothing had ever touched them. And on the largest fragment, etched in something dark and flaking, was a single word: soon.
The air inside the Kido mansion smelled of old incense and something darker, something rotting. Mitsumasa Kido's study was never warm, but tonight the cold was different. It clung to the skin like oil, seeping into the lungs with every breath. The fire in the hearth burned too bright, too blue, casting long, trembling shadows that twitched when unobserved. Seiya rubbed his arms, his skin prickling with unease. Next to him, Shiryu stood unnaturally still, his blind eyes narrowed as if sensing something the others could not. "You're telling us this cursed armor belonged to a saint?" Seiya's voice was too loud in the suffocating silence. Mitsumasa didn't answer at first. His hands, usually steady, trembled as he unrolled an ancient scroll across the mahogany desk. The parchment crackled, brittle with age, its edges blackened as if it had been rescued from a fire. The ink had faded, but the illustrations were unmistakable. 12 constellations, their lines warped, their forms wrong. Aries in particular was distorted, its horns elongated into jagged spears, its body twisted into something predatory. And in the center of the page, a figure knelt in prayer, a knight clad in golden armor, his face hidden behind the ram's visor. But the artist had drawn something else beneath the helmet. Not a man's face, but a gaping maw lined with teeth like shards of broken glass. "His name was Lucius," Mitsumasa finally said, his voice hollow. "A saint of Aries from an era long forgotten, he sought knowledge no mortal should possess." A log cracked in the fireplace. For a moment, the flames dimmed, plunging the room into near darkness. When the light returned, the shadows behind Mitsumasa had changed, stretching, elongating, forming the silhouette of a man in armor. Shiryu inhaled sharply. He's here. The blood-stained history. The scroll told the story of damnation. Centuries ago, Lucius had uncovered forbidden texts beneath the sanctuary, ancient scriptures that spoke of a hunger buried in the stars. The cosmos, the writings claimed, was not empty. Something watched from the void between constellations, something that had been waiting since the dawn of time. The Aries cloth was never just armor. It was a vessel, a conduit. Lucius had performed a ritual on the night of a black moon. He had carved his own flesh with sacred blades, offering his blood to the stars. The other gold saints found him at dawn, kneeling in the temple of Aries, his armor fused to his skin. His screams had not been human. When they tried to remove the cloth, it resisted. Metal rippled, tendrils of gold burrowing deeper into muscle and bone. The more they pulled, the more Lucius changed, his jaw unhinging, his ribs splitting open like a second mouth, his spine elongating into something serpentine. In the end, they had no choice. They cut him apart. 12 pieces for 12 houses. His limbs were buried beneath the Zodiac temples, his heart sealed in the depths of the Pope's chambers. The Aries cloth was locked away, bound with chains of silver and prayers. But now, the chains were breaking. Mu's transformation. Mu had not slept in days. The whispers had started the moment he set foot back in the sanctuary. At first, they were faint, a rustling at the edge of his hearing, a breath against his neck when no one was there. Then came the visions, flashes of a golden mask, slick with blood, a voice that was not his own, murmuring in a language that made his teeth ache, and the dreams. In them, he stood in a field of corpses, knights in shattered armor, their faces frozen in eternal screams. Above him, the sky was not black, but a sickly, pulsating green, the stars arranged in patterns that hurt to comprehend. And at the center of it all, a throne of bone, where something sat wearing Lucius's face, or what was left of it. You were always the most gifted, Mu, but you cannot win the hunger of the stars. When Mu woke, his hands were bleeding. His nail fingers were torn off, the beds raw and glistening, as if he had been clawing at something in his sleep. And on the wall above his bed, etched in his own blood, were 3 words: "We see you." The mask cracks. The other saints were noticing. Death Mask had seen Mu standing motionless in the House of Cancer at midnight, staring into the celestial void with eyes that reflected too much light. Aphrodite's roses had withered the moment Mu passed them, their petals curling into blackened husks. And Shaka had heard it. During meditation, the Virgo saint had sensed a presence slithering through the sanctuary's psychic wards. Something vast, something old, wearing Mu's face like an ill-fitting mask. When he confronted Mu, he smiled. It wasn't his smile. "Do you hear them, Shaka?" Mu whispered, his voice layered with something else. "The stars are singing, and they are so very hungry." The revelation. Back in the Kido mansion, the temperature dropped further. Seiya's breath fogged the air, as Mitsumasa unclasped a small iron-bound box. Inside, nestled in velvet the color of dried blood, was a fragment of golden metal. A single shard of the Aries cloth, its edges jagged, its surface etched with the same runes from the tomb. "This is all that remains of the original armor," Mitsumasa said. "The rest was sealed away, but now—" He didn't need to finish. The shard was moving, twitching, vibrating, as if something inside it was struggling to break free. And then, a sound, a heartbeat, thumping dully from within the metal. Shiryu's face drained of color. "It's alive." Seiya reached out, his fingers trembling, and the shard lunged at him. It sliced his palm open before clattering back into the box, his blood sizzling where it touched the metal. The wound didn't hurt. That was the worst part. It didn't hurt at all.
The fog came at midnight. It slithered through the sanctuary's marble columns like a living thing, thick and black, swallowing the moonlight whole. By the time the first scream echoed through the halls, it was already too late. The mist had teeth. Maureen knew something was wrong when her silver mask began to weep. The warm trickle of liquid down her cheeks made her reach up, only to recoil as her fingers came away sticky with crimson. The metal was bleeding. No, not just bleeding, pulsing, as if something beneath the surface was breathing. She tore it off with a gasp, the mask clattering to the floor, and twitching. The empty eye sockets bulged, the metal warping with wet, crunching sounds. Then, with a sound like cracking bone, the mask split open, not along the edges, but vertically, down the center, forming jagged lips that peeled back in a grin too wide for any human face. "Little bird," it rasped, in a voice that was Maureen's own, distorted and guttural. "You always hid behind this mask. Now let me show you what hides behind you." Behind her, the shadows moved. The armor that wears its master. Ioria had been training in the Leo temple when the golden plates of his cloth began to itch. At first, it was just an annoyance, a prickling sensation along his arms, like ants crawling beneath his skin. But then the itching became pain, and the pain became pressure, as if his very bones were being reshaped from within. When he ripped off his gauntlet, the sight made his stomach lurch. His veins were black. Thick, branching lines of darkness spread up his forearm, pulsing in time with his heartbeat. And beneath his skin, something moved. Tiny, needle-like protrusions pressed against his flesh from the inside, forming shapes that made no sense. Spirals, jagged runes, constellations he didn't recognize. Then his cloth screamed. Not a metallic groan, but a true, throat-rending shriek that echoed through the temple. The golden lion on his chest plate twisted, its muzzle splitting open to reveal rows of human teeth. Its eyes rolled wildly before locking on to Ioria, and in that moment he knew this wasn't his cloth anymore. It was wearing him. The Garden of Blood. Aphrodite stumbled through his beloved rose garden, his once pristine robes drenched in sweat and something darker. The flowers were watching him. Their petals had peeled back to reveal glistening, meaty centers, pulsing things that resembled tongues more than stamens. They whispered as he passed, their voices a chorus of sighs and whimpers, forming words that slithered into his ears and nested there. You watered us with lies, saint of beauty. Now let us return the favor. A thorn-studded vine lashed out, wrapping around his ankle with terrifying strength. He barely had time to scream before it yanked, dragging him face first into the mulch. The earth beneath him was warm, breathing. And as the roses closed in, their stems elongating into skeletal fingers, Aphrodite realized the garden had always been hungry. The Raven's Banquet. By dawn, the fog had condensed into shapes. Corpses of long-dead saints lurched through the mist, their armor rusted through, their hollow eye sockets swarming with beetles that spilled from their mouths like liquid shadow. The ravens came next, a swirling mass of feathers and snapping beaks, their eyes glowing a sickly yellow. But the worst part? They were singing. A distorted, off-key rendition of Athena's hymn, their cause forming words that shouldn't have been possible. Sheep for the slaughter, gold turns to rot, 12 will be 1, and 1 will be... Shaka heard it first. The Virgo saint stood at the heart of the storm, his normally serene face twisted in horror as the ravens merged mid-flight, their bodies melting together into a single grotesque mass of writhing feathers and snapping beaks. It hit the ground with a wet thud, limbs rearranging, and stood up, wearing Aldebaran's face. The stars are almost aligned, the thing croaked through a mouth that split too wide, revealing a second set of teeth where its throat should be. Will you join the feast, or will you be the main course? The reflection in the pool. At the temple of Athena, Saori knelt before the sacred pool, her reflection staring at her with eyes that held no recognition. The water wasn't water anymore. It was thick, syrupy, the color of a fresh bruise. When she dipped her fingers in, the liquid clung to her skin, crawling up her wrists in thin, vein-like strands. Her reflection grinned, a sharp, predatory expression that showed too many teeth. You thought you were a goddess? You're just a vessel, like Lucius, like all of them. Behind her, the statues of past saints wept tears of molten gold, and in the distance, the first of 12 bells began to toll.
The air inside the eclipse was not meant to be breathed. It was thick, cloying, tasting of copper and burnt hair, filling Icky's lungs like wet cement. The ground beneath him was not ground at all. It shifted, pulsed, a living membrane stretched over something vast and hungry. The sky was a gaping wound, a swirling vortex of bruised purples and sickly greens, where stars blinked like watching eyes. This was not a place. It was a digestive tract, and Icky had willingly walked into its jaws. The first torment, the brother who never was. The whispers came first. Icky. A child's voice. Familiar. Impossible. He turned, and there he stood. Shun. But not the Shun he knew. This one was smaller, paler, his eyes glassy and unblinking. The Andromeda cloth hung from his tiny frame like a burial shroud. The chains rusted, the metal weeping a thick black fluid. You were supposed to protect me, not Shun said, his voice a perfect mimicry of childhood innocence. Then his mouth kept moving, kept stretching, the lower jaw unhinging like a snake's. Icky's fists clenched. "You're not real." The thing wearing Shun's face giggled, a sound like cracking ice. "Aren't I?" Then it lunged, not at Icky, but into him, its body dissolving into smoke that forced itself down Icky's throat. The taste was unbearable: rotting fruit, spoiled milk, the sour tang of fierce sweat. Visions flooded his mind. Shun, 6 years old, strapped to a metal table in Death Queen Island, his small body convulsing as surgeons with needle fingers pried open his ribs. Shun screaming as the Andromeda cloth fused to his skin, the chains burrowing into his veins like parasites. Shun, older, but broken, his eyes hollow as he whispered, "Big brother, why did you let them do this to me?" Icky roared, his phoenix flames erupting in a burst of crimson, but the fire burned inward, scalding his own flesh. The curse was feeding on his guilt, turning his power against him. The second torment. The army of the dead. The landscape shifted. Now he stood on a battlefield littered with corpses, all wearing his face. Hundreds of Ickies in various states of decay, their bodies twisted in eternal agony. Some were pinned to the ground by their own cloth, the phoenix armor having grown into their flesh like metallic tumors. Others had been flayed open, their rib cages pried apart to form grotesque wings. And they were watching him. "Welcome home," the corpses chorused, their voices a dry rustle of dead leaves. One of the corpses sat up, its jaw hanging by a thread of tendon. "Do you remember her?" Icky didn't need to ask who it meant. Esmeralda's body materialized at his feet, her once beautiful face now a ruined mass of scar tissue, her lips sewn shut with coarse black thread. Her eyelids had been removed, her glassy eyes staring up at him in silent accusation. The corpse continued. "You couldn't save her. You couldn't save Shun. What makes you think you can save anyone now?" Icky fell to his knees, his fingers digging into the ashen soil. And the ground screamed. The third torment. The thing wearing his face. The sky split open. A figure descended, wreathed in flames darker than any Icky had ever conjured. It wore the phoenix cloth, but the armor had changed. The wings were lined with hooked talons, the helmet's crest elongated into a jagged crown. And when it landed before him, Icky saw the worst horror of all. It had his face, but the eyes were all wrong, black from edge to edge, swimming with tiny pinprick stars. It rained a hand to Icky's cheek. It burned, but left no mark. "Poor little phoenix, you spent your whole life fighting, but you never realized." It plunged a hand into Icky's chest. No pain, no blood. Just the terrible, intimate sensation of fingers wrapping around his still beating heart. The only thing you were ever fighting was yourself. The revelation. The price of the eclipse. Icky's vision swum. The world dissolved into fragments, flashes of Lucius's last moments, the Aries saint writhing as his armor consumed him from within. But now the vision changed. It wasn't just Lucius. Every saint who had ever worn the Aries cloth was there, their bodies contorted in identical agony, their armor fusing to their flesh like grotesque tumors. And at the center of it all, looming over them like a spider over its web, was something else. A shapeless mass of gold and shadow, its form shifting between ram, man, and something far worse. The cloths were never ours. They were traps, vessels for the hunger between stars. And you, Icky, you walked right into its jaws. The thing wearing Icky's face leaned close, its breath smelling of charred meat. But here's the secret, little bird. It pressed their foreheads together. To break the curse, the world went white. You have to let it eat you. Ikki awoke on his knees, his body racked with tremors. The eclipse still surrounded him, but now he understood. This wasn't just a dimension. It was a stomach. And the only way out was through digestion. His phoenix cloth lay before him, but it was changing. The flames dying, the metal blackening, the wings curling inward like a dying insect. The curse was trying to claim him as it had claimed Lucius, as it would claim them all. Ikki reached out, not to push it away, but to embrace it.
The sanctuary was no longer a place of gods. It was a feeding ground. 12 golden temples stood in ruins, their columns cracked like broken ribs, their altars slick with a substance too thick to be blood. The sky had peeled back like rotting skin, revealing the pulsating void beyond, a vast, hungry darkness where constellations writhed like maggots in a wound. And at the center of it all, where the house of Aries once stood, Lucius waited. Not the man, not the saint, the thing he had become. 1. The last gathering. They came to him broken. Shiryu dragged himself forward on shattered arms, his dragon cloth reduced to smoldering scraps, his eyes seared shut by visions no mortal should witness. Behind him, Hyoga limped, his left leg encased in jagged ice that bit into his flesh with every step, a cruel mockery of his own techniques. Sia was the worst. The Pegasus Saint crawled, his body a ruin of broken bones and weeping burns. His cloth was gone, not destroyed, but absorbed. The star metal fused directly into his skin in grotesque, swirling patterns. Yet still he moved, still he fought, because Saori was screaming. Her voice echoed across the ruined sanctuary, a sound so full of pain it made the very air tremble. Her body hung suspended above the shattered remains of the Aries temple, her body wrapped in strands of liquid gold that pulsed like veins. The strands connected her to Lucius. No, to the abomination Lucius had become. The Aries cloth had won. It had digested its saint. What stood before them now was neither man nor armor, but a grotesque fusion of both, a towering figure of molten gold and exposed muscle. Its helmet split open to reveal a face that was equal parts Lucius and something older. Its mouth stretched too wide, lined with teeth like shards of broken constellations. Its eyes were voids. Its voice was the sound of a dying star. "You are late," it said, and the ground trembled. "The alignment is nearly complete." 2. The Feast of the Constellations. Shun arrived next, his Andromeda chains dragging behind him like dead serpents. His eyes were hollow, his lips moving soundlessly. Prayers or curses, it didn't matter. The chains twitched as Lucius turned its gaze upon him. "Little Andromeda," it crooned, "you were always the fragile one, the breakable one." Then it moved. One moment it stood at the center of the ruin. The next, it was inside Shun's personal space, its clawed fingers caressing his cheek. The touch left burns in the shape of ancient runes. "Would you like to see what your brother saw?" Shun screamed as the visions hit him. Ikki, trapped in the eclipse, his body unraveling into strands of golden light as the phoenix cloth ate him alive from the inside. Hyoga attacked first. His diamond dust should have frozen the monster solid. Instead, the ice melted before it even touched Lucius's skin, the droplets reforming midair into tiny, skittering things that crawled back toward Hyoga, burrowing into his flesh. Shiryu was next. The dragon's fury unleashed 100 punches in the span of a heartbeat, but each blow landed with a wet, hollow sound, his fist sinking into Lucius's golden flesh as if it were quicksand. Then it hardened, trapping Shiryu's arms up to the elbows. "You misunderstand," Lucius whispered, leaning close. "This is not a battle. This is a sacrament." With a wet tear, it pulled Shiryu's arms free, not ripping them off, but stretching them, the bones and muscle elongating into grotesque, twitching tendrils that flopped uselessly at the dragon saint's sides. Sia's punch came from nowhere. His fist writhed in the last dregs of Pegasus's power, connected with Lucius's jaw, and the sky screamed. 3. The Phoenix's gift. The impact did nothing to Lucius, but it did something to the world. For the briefest moment, the writhing void above them rippled, and through the tear they saw it. Ikki, or what was left of him. He floated in the heart of the eclipse, his body half dissolved into strands of golden light as his phoenix cloth unspooled around him like a cocoon. But his eyes still burned, and he was smiling. "Now," his voice echoed across dimensions, "burn it all." The phoenix cloth detonated, not in fire, in light. A searing, purifying radiance that tore through the eclipse, through the void, through the very fabric of the curse. Lucius howled, its body convulsing as the golden strands connecting it to Saori began to blacken and wither. "No!" it roared. "You don't understand. The hunger will not be denied." Shun moved. His chains, thought dead, erupted to life, wrapping around Lucius's throat, not to strangle, to connect. "I do understand," Shun whispered, tears of blood streaking his face. "That's why we lose." And then, with a final shuddering gasp, he pulled, not on Lucius, on the curse itself. The golden strands reversed their flow, the corruption that had been draining Saori now surging into Shun, his body convulsing as the ancient hunger poured into him. His skin split, his eyes boiled, his very bones began to sing with the voices of 1,000 devoured saints. Lucius stared in horror. "What have you done?" Shun's answering smile was beatific. "Fed it something it can't digest." 4. The last sacrifice. Andromeda's chains shattered, not into metal, into stars. A supernova erupted from Shun's body, a light so pure that it scoured the corruption from the air, the earth, the very souls of those it touched. Lucius unraveled, its form dissolving into screaming strands of gold that withered to ash before they hit the ground. Saori fell. Sia caught her, and when the light faded, only one thing remained where Shun had stood. The Aries cloth, purified, empty, and finally silent. Epilogue. The dawn that never comes. They buried what was left of Shun in the ruins of the Aries temple. Ikki was gone, not dead, not alive, just absent. His phoenix cloth reduced to a single, smoldering feather that refused to burn out. The other saints recovered, but slowly. Their wounds healed, but the scars remained. Not on their skin, but on their souls. Shiryu waked screaming from dreams of elongated arms. Joga's ice would sometimes whisper to him in languages not of this earth. And Sia stood at the edge of the sanctuary every dawn, watching the horizon, waiting. Because sometimes, just for a moment, He could swear he heard it, the distant echoing cry of a phoenix, and the laughter of a brother who had cheated death one last time.